what's up? Sanisa Superbad Estrada here, and I just want to give a huge special shout out to the Relay. Thank you so much for all of the continuous support, and thank you for all of the support during and after and before every single fight.
Welcome to the motherfucking Relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. What is an ambitious endeavor from veteran promoter and Hall of Famer Lou Dibella, who is organizing a Bantamweight tournament as the next step in women's boxing. Lou Dibella still cares. That's saying a lot, considering the love-hate relationship the Hall of Fame promoter has often had with the sport of boxing. But when it comes to the sweeter science, the New Yorker still believes, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to give the women of the sport not only their time to shine, but make a fair wage in the process. And now, that means putting together an 8-woman tournament to crown the sport's first undisputed bantamweight champion. That's great on paper, but we all know how on paper works in real life. So here's the kicker. Each of the fighters Dibella wants in the tournament, IBF title holder Miyo Yoshida, WBA titleist Shernika Johnson, and WBC, WBO, Ring Magazine champion Dina Thorslund, as well as IBO belt holder Amanda Gaye, former champion Nina Hughes, up-and-comer Sharita Metcalf, former champion Jamie Mitchell, and Shannon Courtenay. They're all in. We've spoken to representatives of all 8 girls in the tournament, and I've also spoken to most of the sanctioning bodies, and they're all supportive of the Bellator boxing scene. They know how difficult it is to make fights for women right now in this environment. But right now, we have 8 of the best women in the world in the same weight class, and they're willing to fight each other, which is something that can't always be said for those on the men's side of the sport. But the ladies have always been amenable to taking the toughest matchups possible if it meant getting to the point of some parity with the men when it comes to the paydays. Even doing that, however, has never been a guarantee of better money. And while the $1 million paydays earned by Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano for their bout in 2022 was a bright spot and a momentary move in the right direction, as of late, women's boxing has largely fallen on the back burner when it comes to the paydays, card placement, and broadcast exposure. Dibella, a longtime proponent of women's boxing, wants this situation to change, and it starts with the tournament that he hopes will kick off in the fall, ideally in October, but no later than November.
Can they do it?
And to be completed in a year's time. We're sending the paperwork this week, asking the women to confirm that we can go out and shop the tournament to broadcasters, etc., Dibella said. We haven't locked in all the purses because it's going to be dependent on what we're able to get for the TV rights and sponsorship. But every woman in this tournament, none of them have been spoiled. Dina Thorslund has been defending 3 belts and frankly, not being very well compensated for it. And none of the 8 women here, although we have multiple world champions and ex-world champions, has been able to make a great living. And this is not about trying to break the bank. This is about trying to get a partnership, trying to get some streaming service and some sponsor support to do this tournament in a way that everybody can be treated fairly. This is not about equality. Frankly, it's about basic fairness and finding a partner out there to help support the unification of a major division in women's boxing.
Who can be of assistance?
I don't want to idealize the situation because things are seldom ever ideal in the world of boxing. I would not rely on ESPN. Even though they're the biggest sports network in the country, they can't be relied on for this assignment.
Their investment in women's boxing has been minimal.
The unification can bring in fans from around the globe, as the 8 boxers hail from the United States, Japan, the UK, Australia, Denmark, and Canada, each with a compelling story that can bring in more and more fans with each round of the tournament, that builds relationships that will lead to bigger and better opportunities, and subsequently, better paydays. So thus far, it was a no-brainer to put the most important element of this together.
What about DAZN?
DAZN as a platform has made a much larger investment in the sport of women's boxing over the last 5 or 6 years than ESPN has. So I would sooner count on DAZN to do the tournament before ESPN. And that doesn't even mean it's a guarantee. That doesn't mean it's a lock. That's just saying I think DAZN would do it before ESPN would do it.
Do what?
Put the money up to make the tournament happen. Getting them on board to unify their division is not even an issue, said Dibella, when it comes to the fighters. They're like, okay, let's get it done. And the first step was to go to each of the girls and get a commitment. First mission accomplished. Now it's up to Dibella to get someone to step up with a platform for these ladies to perform. That's the real struggle. But as strongly as he feels about this topic, who would bet against him? I have invested over a decade of my life paying attention to the women, where other people weren't, he said. And I also watched when there was this need for women's fights, and all of a sudden, everyone was watching during the pandemic. Every other fight was a women's fight, and it was getting much easier for the women to get paid. But I was also pointing out, even when it looked like everything was wonderful, there isn't a developmental series for women. There's not a single network worldwide that has a women's boxing series. The overwhelming majority of televised fight cards around the world don't even feature one female fight. For the working class female fighter, for the female fighter who even comes out of the Olympics and is a prospect, there is no money there to help develop you. And we can marvel at the incredible success of Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, and we could look at another half a dozen women who have been able to support themselves and put some money in the bank and live a life like a champion. But the overwhelming majority of female champions worldwide are still struggling to live a middle-class life. I care because they're the kind of athletes that will agree to this kind of a tournament with a reasonable discussion, he said. I care because I'm tired of explaining to women that have worked really hard and have watched the sport grow in terms of depth, of its talent and the quality of the fights, and still not be able to achieve basic fairness. I care because it's the right thing to do.
Can it be done?
The budget for an 8-woman tournament in the Bantamweight division would be considerably less than what was spent out to do the World Boxing Super Series Season 1 and Season 2. It won't be as expensive as that was.
I don't think that many, if any, of these fighters are making 7-figure paydays.
It's like Lou Dibella said, none of these ladies are spoiled brats. None of these ladies have the red carpet or have had the red carpet rolled out for them. So when you think about the fiscal aspect of it, it can be done so long as you have an interested party, an interested investor.
How much money do you see frittered away on male boxers that don't put on a great performance, don't put on a fan-friendly fight? I'm telling you that every single fight in this 8-woman tournament would be an action fight. Not one or some, every single one.
But it takes an investor with vision, an investor who's willing to roll the dice, willing to gamble.
Because it is a gamble.
And I feel like DAZN would get behind a tournament like this before ESPN would. And you can forget about premium cable networks because both of them have left the sport of boxing, both HBO and Showtime. So it really is down to those two platforms, ESPN and DAZN.
To a lesser extent, UFC Fight Pass, but UFC Fight Pass ain't got much money.
So when I heard that Lou Dibella was trying to put together an 8-woman tournament with all three of the champions at 118 pounds, I got excited, but I curbed my enthusiasm because it's going to take money.
Somebody's got to put the money up.
Before you even start thinking about how these fights might break down and who will be the last woman standing, somebody's got to put up the money to make it happen.
And I hope somebody does, because it's a fantastic idea.
All we can do is wait. Men's super middleweight news, a few words from live dog, quote-unquote, Edgar Berlanga, who promises Canelo Alvarez an all-action fight.
Do that, you're going to get yourself knocked out.
In the long, dramatic horse race that saw the obvious favorite barred from entering, David Benavidez, perhaps the most deserving long shot is poised to cross the wire.
He's crossed it now. They officially announced the fight yesterday.
Berlanga will be a live dog. He won't run. He's going to go for it. If he goes down, he'll go down fighting and put on a show, said Gary Jonas, the CEO of Pro Box TV and Boxing Scene, who previously managed Berlanga and now serves as a supporter, observer to the fighter. Well, he trains at the Jonas Pro Box boxing facility in Plant City, Florida, described by insiders at times as a heated negotiation. Alvarez and the PBC flirted with an alternate candidate in England's Chris Eubank Jr. in what was ultimately viewed as a negotiation tactic. According to officials familiar with the talks, one official described the deal Wednesday as done.
It is now.
So how was flirting with the idea of fighting Chris Eubank Jr. a negotiation tactic for an Edgar Berlanga fight?
Maybe what they figured is that Edgar would be likelier to take what's on the table, the deal as it is, if he knows there's another guy in the running and the fight might go to him. That might leave Edgar and his team so inclined to just take the deal as it is in a hurry.
A negotiation tactic.
That's what that is.
Brooklyn's charismatic 27-year-old Edgar Berlanga, 22-0 with 17 KOs, burst upon the scene by posting 16 consecutive first-round knockouts while fighting under the top-ranked promotional banner before falling out of favor during 5 consecutive bouts that went the distance, including one in which Berlanga was knocked down. Berlanga returned to the ring this past February in Orlando and knocked out little-known Padraig McCrory in the 6th round after showing good enough for the WBA's president, Gilberto Mendoza, to elevate Berlanga to mandatory status in their ratings.
Chicanery.
Before Edgar Berlanga even won that fight, Cuba's own David Morrell was already registered as the WBA's regular champion, and it was initially thought that he would be the mandatory challenger for Canelo Alvarez via the WBA. Then they go and make this decision. They give that status to this guy. That was a dubious eye-rolling decision, given the presence of unbeaten former WBC middleweight champion David Benavidez as well in the division, along with another unbeaten fighter in Christian Mobili. And even the first in-line mandatory for the undisputed champion Alvarez, the IBF's top-rated William Skull of Cuba, saying he won't fight Benavidez for less than $150 million. Mexico's 34-year-old Canelo Alvarez temporarily put Skull on pause, and now he's fighting Edgar Berlanga at the expense of his IBF title. The IBF are now moving to strip Canelo. Is it really worth it?
Returning to Las Vegas for an Amazon Prime Video pay-per-view fight that will also be offered by the broadcast partner of Berlanga, promoter Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Promotions, on DAZN.
Alvarez will now be in competition for combat sports fans' buys against UFC 306, hyped up by company president Dana White as an extraordinary debut for the organization at the new Las Vegas Sphere. Alvarez generated just more than 500,000 pay-per-view buys for his May 4th unanimous decision victory over countryman Jaime Munguia.
It's Munguia.
While an Alvarez fight on a Mexican holiday carries cachet, his fans have increasingly expressed fatigue over him avoiding the marquee fight against Benavidez.
Well, now, in fairness, it's David who decided to stay at 175.
They're the ones who sent the letter to the WBC that they would proceed as light heavyweights instead of super middleweights. They did that. That was their decision. As far as Canelo competing with the UFC,
He's not competing for the same eyeballs as they are because UFC fans don't necessarily watch boxing and boxing fans don't necessarily watch UFC. Not all of them. It's a very small pool of people you're talking about. Hybrid fans that watch both sports?
Jonas expects Alvarez to again fare well with pay-per-view buyers, calling the UFC counter-programming a non-issue. Mexican Independence Day weekend is a boxing tradition, Jonas said. The UFC can still sell out its arena, but anyone coming to buy tickets for Canelo was not going to be buying tickets for the UFC. No one's knocking the UFC, but boxing's fan base will stick to its tradition. This is like challenging tennis in New York on Labor Day or the Masters in April. You're talking about tradition here. As for the fight, Jonas sees Berlanga as a mirror image, bookend foe.
That's the nuance with Canelo Alvarez and this situation. As much as people don't like this fight, there is a high probability that it does commercially well.
The twist with Berlanga is the zest of his Puerto Rican heritage. I actually think Berlanga's buys will be more than Munguia's, Jonas said. Canelo versus Munguia was the same audience. Berlanga-Canelo, Puerto Rico versus Mexico, makes far more sense. It'll be entertaining, a fiesta for the Puerto Rican fans, hoping Berlanga can step up, while it's always fun for the Mexicans to watch one of their fighters beat up a Puerto Rican.
And it's always fun to watch Puerto Rican girls' ass.
I don't know what any of that has to do with boxing, but all right.
Okay.
So as strange as this might sound, as much as people don't like this fight and don't want this fight, there's still a high probability that commercially it does well because of the tradition of watching a big-time boxing match during a Mexican holiday.
And the UFC?
The UFC is going to do what the UFC is going to do irrespective of the boxing match because they don't share that big an audience. Yes, there are some combat sports fans that watch both, but it's a very small pool. To suggest that an MMA fight and a boxing match might cannibalize each other's audience is to suggest that they're sharing an audience when they really aren't. Most MMA fans, they just watch MMA. And most boxing fans, most of them, they just watch boxing. So you can hold two shows parallel to each other because you're not actually sharing an audience.
It's not the same demo.
On Tuesday, Benavidez opted to stop wasting his time waiting for Alvarez as WBC super middleweight mandatory contender and chose to be next in line for the winner of October's undisputed light heavyweight title fight between champions Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol. Benavidez's promoter Samson Lukowicz said his fighter then wants to meet the winner on Cinco de Mayo weekend of next year, a highly bold move. That's saying the least, thinking that you can usurp Canelo Alvarez's day, his week from him?
That's not up to you.
That's up to whoever's paying for the fight. The supposed fight between you and the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol, that's really up to Turkey al-Sheikh.
Who said he wants to do it on Cinco de Mayo?
My thoughts.
Canelo versus Berlanga is not a good fight. It's a mismatch.
Not all Mexico versus Puerto Rico fights are built equal, and that's the bottom line. Yeah, Edgar's from Puerto Rico, but he's no Felix Trinidad. He's no Wilfredo Gomez.
Then why do you figure this could still do commercially well?
Because the baseline for a Canelo Alvarez fight is at or around 500,000 buys. That's what he can do by himself. Without a big name, that's what he can do.
That's what he's done.
So when you bring a Puerto Rican fight into it, well, maybe that'll inspire some Puerto Rican fight fans to buy the fight, maybe. And if nothing else, it's the tradition that sells it. Just like Jonas highlighted, it's a big-time boxing match during a Mexican holiday, so some fight fans are going to buy it just because of that, irrespective of who Canelo is fighting.
Strange, I know.
As far as the fight itself and why so many people are against it, it's because Edgar doesn't exhibit any of the characteristics, any of the qualities to make this a fight and give Canelo a problem. It would help if he knew how to use his height and use his length in tandem with that Soviet pendulum step that we saw from Dmitry Bivol when he fought Canelo Alvarez, having a bit of speed and a bit of timing.
Bouncing back and forth, in and out, on your toes.
He doesn't do that. And even if he started out his career with 16 consecutive first-round knockouts, who were those guys? I mean, really? What kind of fighters were they? Not the kind of fighters he's about to fight in September.
Obviously.
So he doesn't have the speed, the timing, the footwork, or the movement for Canelo Alvarez. Doesn't have the experience. We can see that plain as day.
Obviously.
You haven't even fought a Jaime Munguia. You haven't even fought a Caleb Plant. So how do you go from Padraig McCrory to Canelo Alvarez and we're supposed to believe you're a live dog in a fight? You're a live animal.
How?
I suppose the silver lining is if you're a fight fan out there who's been wanting to see Canelo Alvarez knock somebody out, there's a high probability that he knocks this guy out, that he knocks out Edgar Berlanga.
If that's all it's about for you.
If you are more of a Canelo Alvarez fanatic, more of a Canelo fan than a fight fan, and all you really want to do is see him knock out somebody during a Mexican holiday, well, I think you're going to get that, if that's what you're paying for.
If that's all.
I've been watching Edgar Berlanga over the years, and I don't like the way this guy holds a shot. When a shot gets in, I don't like how he reacts. He kind of just pauses. He's stunned.
Whereas a guy like Jaime Munguia, if a shot gets in, he takes the shot, he holds the shot, he keeps fighting. Edgar kind of just stops in his tracks. He kind of just pauses.
So that in the Steve Rolls fight. Steve Rolls, guy from Canada, likes to move around, stay behind his jab. Whenever a jab got in for Steve,
Edgar saw the white light.
Just halted him, stopped him in his tracks, and that was against the Steve Rolls who's on his toes, moving around, not sitting on his punches. Canelo, he's gonna sit on his punches, and obviously, he's a stronger puncher than a Steve Rolls. So in all likelihood, Edgar is gonna get himself countered.
It's just a question of when, how early.
Because Canelo can finish this fight with this guy whenever he wants to finish this fight with this guy. He can kill him quick, or he could let it go a few rounds.
It's up to him.
Because it's a mismatch in terms of the fighter's characteristics, their tendencies, their experience level, and what they've shown us so far. Canelo versus Berlanga is a mismatch, an $80 mismatch.
One of two pay-per-views happening that same month. Remember, Joshua versus Dubois is happening that same month.
So you know.